Our topic today will be the fruits of atheism. Kyle, you've employed a homophone in your title. I ran into this driving an RV across the state border into California. I was stopped at the border by a state agent. It was my father-in-law's RV. He said, "Do you have any fruit or nuts in your RV?" Well, all I had behind me were my in-laws. It was then that I understood I had run into a homophone. We have been greatly enriched and blessed by Kyle's presence with us. And I'm reminded of a verse in Matthew where Jesus says that God observes those. He takes notice of those that leave their families behind to do his good work. So we appreciate you and we appreciate your family, and I hope you'll express to them our appreciation. I saw friends at the seminar from Winfield, from Newton, from Clearwater, Mulvane, McPherson, Derby, Augusta, Oklahoma. So people came from some distance around to take part in this seminar, and I'm grateful for those that came, those that are here this morning. I believe at the seminar we had people from all across the spectrum of belief to disbelief, and all of them left with their own conclusions. But while they were there, they were presented with facts that they can put into their pocket, put into their notes, put into their mind, and leave there and consider those as they go through life. I believe we also had those across the spectrum of religious affiliation, believers, but of all different affiliations. And so we're grateful that we were all able to meet in unity on this topic. And I was grateful that one disbeliever ran into Steve Lamb after one of those sessions, and in the foyer there they had a discussion, and I thought, what better person could they encounter than Steve Lamb? So Steve, I appreciate you and that gentle conversation that took place there. Kyle, we'll turn things over to you at this time. Thank you.
In the late 1800s, a man by the name of George Waltzer decided that he was going to do what he called a social experiment. He decided that he was going to found a town in Missouri on atheism. In fact, he thought that what he could show the world was that the town that he would found, Liberal, Missouri, would be the first of its kind, but it would be the first of many, because he suggested that, hey, atheism is such a valid, good philosophy that if people will believe that there is no God, that there is no heaven, that there is no hell, if we can get lots of those people who believe that together, our society will be productive, it will be efficient, it will be wholesome, and it will be something that everyone else will want to be a part of. And so that's what he did. He founded Liberal, Missouri. It didn't turn out exactly the way that George Waltzer had planned. In fact, there was a man who, if I understand it correctly, was a member of the Lord's church. He was a gospel preacher, itinerant, traveled around. He was a debater as well. His name was Clark Braden. And Clark Braden went into Liberal, Missouri, just to see what was going on. And Clark Braden wrote an article for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in May of 1885. And in that article he said, Liberal Missouri is a cesspool of immorality. He said, all the kids cuss, so do the women, so do the men. He said, the children don't obey their parents, they talk back to them, they are disrespectful. He said, it is a lazy place where no one is doing any work, that the property value has sunk so low that people would get out if they could, but they can't. All of the hotels have turned into brothels, and Liberal Missouri is a festering mass of infection. Now, the people in Liberal Missouri didn't take that too kindly. In fact, one of the hotel owners that he had said had turned into a brothel sued Clark Braden for $25,000. And in 1885, $25,000 was a considerable sum of money. And yet, the case was thrown out of court. Clark Braden never had to say a single word in his defense. Apparently, what he said had such a ring of truth to it that the opposition realized that he could verify and prove everything that he said. It was not libel or slander, and so the person who sued Clark Braden had to pay all of the court costs. Liberal, Missouri. You can go there today. I have, I guess it was about 7 years ago now, I was speaking something very similar to this weekend at Lamar, Missouri. Liberal, Missouri is just outside of Lamar, Missouri, about 45 minutes or so. You can see that there's a population of about 779. As you stroll the streets of this very small town in Missouri, you see names that remind you of the founder, George Waltzer. You see names that remind you of the founding principles, Darwin Drive, Ingersoll Avenue, several of the most noted disbelievers, unbelievers, skeptics, agnostics, atheists of their time. The roads are named after them. The irony of Liberal, Missouri now is that if you are to go to the center of the town, all of the people who died in Liberal, Missouri are buried in a circle facing the middle where George Waltzer was going to be buried. George Waltzer wasn't buried in Liberal, Missouri. In fact, his grave is in Lamar, Missouri. Because later in his life, he came in contact with the teachings of Christ, and he realized that atheism did not have a valid argument, and that the teachings of Christ were much more true and valid, and he decided he didn't want to be buried in a city or town filled with atheists, and he wanted to be buried in Lamar, Missouri. Liberal, Missouri. A social experiment. There's something that Liberal, Missouri did prove to the world, and that is that when you take a town, that's a copy of the actual article that Clark Braden wrote there in 1885. When you take a society and you found it on godless atheism, you don't get a wholesome society. You get something that the person who is looking to have a wholesome, good, productive life does not want to be a part of. What are the fruits of atheism? Now, I labeled this lesson, The Fruits of Atheism, taking it from a statement by Jesus that you're probably very familiar with. There, near the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said that by their fruits you will know them. What he meant, of course, was that if you assess a person's belief system based on their actions or the logical implications of the belief system, you will be able to ascertain if it's good or bad. He said, a good tree does not bear bad fruit, and a bad tree does not bear good fruit. By their fruits you will know them. So what we simply want to ask ourselves this morning is that if a person believes there is no God and acts that belief out in his or her life, what will that look like? Now, before we do that, let me just take a very quick moment to ask the question on the other foot. If a person listens to the teachings of Jesus Christ and acts those beliefs out in his or her life, what would a society based on that look like? Well, let me introduce you to a man. You've probably heard of him. His name is Bertrand Russell. He wrote several essays. One of them was Why I'm Not a Christian. He certainly wasn't a friend of Christianity at all. He didn't believe in God, didn't believe in Christ or the Bible. But here's what he said about Christianity. He said, as soon as it conquered the state, it put an end to the gladiatorial shows. Not because they were cruel, but they were idolatrous. The result was to diminish the widespread education in cruelty by which the populace of Roman towns were degraded. Christianity also did much to soften the lot of slaves. It established charity on a large scale, inaugurated hospitals. Although the great majority of Christians failed lamentably in Christian charity, the ideal remained alive, and in every age inspired some notable saints. In a new form, it passed over modern liberalism and remains the inspiration of much that is most hopeful in our somber world. Mr. Russell, do you believe in Christ? No. Do you believe that Christianity is good? No, not really. I don't think a person should be a Christian because they don't believe in Jesus. Mr. Russell, what happens when people act like Christians? Establish charity on a large scale, inaugurates hospitals, remains the inspiration behind much that is most hopeful in our somber world. You know, what would happen if everybody treated others like they wanted themselves to be treated? What would happen if we were kindly affectionate to one another? If we let brotherly love continue? What would happen if we heeded the words of Paul in the Philippian letter where he said, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ. And he talks about how Christ gave up himself for us. And then he said, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each one of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. Do you think that would be a society where you'd want to live? Do you think it would be thrilling to live in a place where every single person around you put your needs in front of his own? Do you think it would be thrilling to live in a place where people acted like brothers, that they were forgiving, that they repaid no one evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing? You think that'd be a place where you want to live? Oh, sure. You put the teachings of Jesus Christ into practice, and you've got a society that is a utopian society that the world wouldn't even be able to fathom the goodness of it. Now, what happens when you found a society on the idea that there's no God, that humans don't have any inherent value because they're not created in the image of God, they're primordial slime that's evolved over multiplied millions of years, that really the ultimate job or the ultimate purpose of a human being is to pass on his or her genes, and the people next to you, they're not any more important than animals down the street, and you treat people for the benefit of the evolutionary society, and you don't really put anybody else's needs in front of yours because your needs are all that there really is when you're trying to pass on your genes, etc. What happens when you live in a society like that? Well, I'm going to show you. You don't have to take my word for it. I'm going to let the atheists and the unbelievers and the agnostics themselves explain to you what they justify in the name of atheism. If we were to start with Charles Darwin's statement, there is no fundamental difference between man and the higher mammals in their mental faculties. What's he trying to say? He's trying to say that whereas you might be a little smarter than a chimpanzee or a gorilla or something like that, there's no difference in your intelligence. It's just a matter of degree. And you understand what he means by that. I mean, suppose that you're sitting beside someone in the pew and you're a little bit more intelligent than that person. Your IQ's a 115 and their IQ's a 112. Well, all right, you're slightly more intelligent, but it's not a different kind of intelligence. You're a human, they're a human. You got an IQ of 115, they got an IQ of 112, and you're just a little bit smarter. You might be able to do math a little bit quicker, but really in the grand scheme of things, does it make that big of a difference? No, and what he's saying is, as humans, we're no different than mammals. We might have a higher IQ, but it's not a difference of a type of intelligence. It's just a difference of degree. Well, what happens when you understand, when you feel like, when you think, when you base your actions on the idea that humans are just higher mammals? I'm going to show you what happens. If you were to look at William Provine's statement in 1988, he said, modern science directly implies that there are no inherent moral or ethical laws, no absolute guiding principles for human society. Now stop right there. Let's just ask ourselves the question, is it wrong to commit adultery on your spouse? Now, according to William Provine in Modern Science, he says that's really the wrong question to ask. There's nothing inherently morally right or wrong. What you would have to ask in that type of situation is, does it benefit society? How could it pass on your genetic information? Would it help ultimately the human population by getting you to a higher level of evolution? You can't ask, is it right or wrong? Because you see, according to modern science, according to the idea that we've evolved over billions and billions of years, there are no inherent moral absolutes. Is it wrong to shoot 5-year-olds in the head to get them out of the way of society if they're not beneficial to us? Well, that would be, generally speaking, that would be something that he would say, yeah, it wouldn't be the best thing. But you can't say it's inherently right or wrong. You just have to say, what's it do to society? Let me show you how that works, practically speaking. If you were to go to the statistics on teens and sexuality in the United States of America, you might be aware of the fact that there are 32 sexually transmitted diseases out there, that if you were to go to the average shopping mall and you were to count Every 5 people over the age of 12, one of those 5 people has herpes. Herpes is a sexually transmitted virus that person will have for the rest of his or her life. It's not something you can ever get rid of. You can fight the symptoms of it, but you can never find a cure for that. At least we haven't yet. That's one sexually transmitted disease out of 32. HPV has overtaken the common cold. HPV is another sexually transmitted disease. It's overtaken the common cold as the most prevalent sickness in the United States of America today. Every single year, if I understand correctly, 14 million new cases of sexually transmitted diseases are, what would we say, reported. There are approximately 60 million people with sexually transmitted diseases in the United States right now. 14 million new cases every year. If we were to look at teens and, what would we say, teen pregnancy, out of wedlock, etc., you would see that every single year about 1 million teenage girls are pregnant out of wedlock. Every single person looking at this situation understands that something needs to be done. Even the evolutionary atheistic community recognizes that. If you were to just take the stats from Dr. Lawrence Shaw, here's what he says. Oh yeah, this might be happening. We might be seeing this going on. Yeah, it's very prevalent. But he says, why is this the case? Well, before we condemn our teenagers for having sex behind the bike sheds and becoming pregnant, he says, we should remember that this is a natural process by these girls to their rising fertility levels. Society may tut-tut about them, but their actions are part of an evolutionary process that goes back nearly 2 million years. He says, you know what, you might not like this as parents, but you can't say it's wrong. Remember what William Provine said, no inherent moral absolutes or laws? You can say you don't like it, you can say you'd rather not be the case, but before you start getting mad at your 16-year-old kid for getting pregnant behind the bike shed, you should understand that 16-year-old is nothing more than a product of evolution. That 16-year-old is just like an animal. And because we are nothing more than a little bit higher animals, you can't condemn them for that. You can't say they've done anything morally wrong. They're just reacting to an evolutionary process. Now, is that right? No. It's ridiculous. Every single culture from the beginning of human society has understood that sexuality has certain restrictions to it. Could you ever go to the Bible and get the idea that it'd be all right to be sexually promiscuous and sleep with anybody that you wanted to anytime? No. Hebrews 13, verses 1 through 4, especially verse 4 there. Marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18, flee sexual immorality. Every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. And yet you can see the vile sexual promiscuity that's going on in the United States today, and there's a philosophy to which you can go to justify it. Is it wrong? Yeah. If you are an atheist and you do not believe in a God, is it wrong? No. These people are just responding to their evolutionary urges. You see that, as the Russian writer Dostoevsky said, if there is no God, then all things are permissible. Now, let's see how that bears out. Abortion and evolution? You know, this month marked the 11th anniversary of the most murderous act of terrorism that the United States has ever seen. September the 11th. 11 years ago. They took 4 planes, flew 2 of them into the Twin Towers. That day, total with all of the deaths counting, 2,450 deaths that day, approximately. When George W. Bush got on international television, he said, we're going to hunt the people down who are responsible for this. We're not going to let any country house or abet the people that were responsible for this. We're bringing everybody to justice. You know the irony of that speech? The irony of that speech was that very day, September the 11th, we killed 2,450 of our own United States citizens. Oh, we called it abortion. We said it was a medical procedure. But we literally ripped several of them limb from limb. Now, where was the speech that said, it is wrong to kill your own citizens who are unborn? Did you hear that speech? Because I missed it somehow. You know, the day before that, we killed 2,450 of our own United States citizens. The day before that, 2,450. The day before that, 2,450. And every day since 1973 to the tune of 50 million kids. Now, where do you get the idea that it's all right to end the life of a human being because that life might inconvenience you in some way? You get that from the Bible? No, you do not. In fact, if you were to go to the Bible, you would read in Proverbs chapter 6 that these 6 things, yea, 7, the Lord hates, and they're an abomination to the Lord: a lying tongue, a proud look, and guess what's in that list? Hands that shed innocent blood. Throughout the entirety of Scripture, murder is condemned by God. When the rich young ruler came to Jesus and said, "Good teacher, what good thing must I do to inherit the kingdom of God?" Jesus said, "Keep the commandments." The rich young man said, "Which ones?" Jesus included among those commandments, "Do not murder." Where in the world would a society take leave of its senses enough to think that it could kill 1 million babies a year and that would be right? You couldn't go to the Bible. You couldn't go to Christianity. I'll tell you where you could go. Well, you can go to atheism and justify that. I'll guarantee you, in fact, it's done on a regular basis. Barbara Burke says, among some animal species, and hey, if that's all you are, then this reasoning applies, doesn't it? Infant killing appears to be a natural practice. Could it be natural for humans too? A trait inherited from our primate ancestors? Hey, Charles Darwin noted in The Descent of Man that infanticide has been probably the most important of all checks on population growth throughout most of human history. Do you know that baby Komodo dragons can climb trees and adult Komodo dragons cannot? You know why that's the case? The diet of the adult Komodo dragon consists of 10% baby Komodo dragons. They eat the babies. Hey, if you're nothing more than an animal, and we can watch the animal species eliminate their infant babies, what can we do as humans? It's penetrating logic, isn't it? If you start with the idea that there's no God, but if you recognize the self-evident truth that our founding fathers recognized, we hold these truths to be self-evident. So evident, we don't even feel like we need to explain them. And what truth is that? That we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And among those rights are the right to what? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Do you understand that if you get rid of the image of God, you get rid of the foundation for human rights? There are none. Because they're endowed into humans by the Creator, and without the Creator, you are an animal. Now, realistically, you wouldn't be here without the Creator. There's no possible way that anything that we've got going on is here without the Creator, but philosophically, without the Creator, you are nothing more than an animal. And Barbara Burke says, hey, animals kill their babies and so can we. Now, is that morally right? No. But is it congruent with the atheistic idea? Yes, it's the logical implication of atheism. Continue with me. If we were to ask ourselves, if there really is no God, what's the real value of human life? I want you to see this man, Peter Singer. Before you read this quote, let me tell you who Peter Singer is. I debated a man by the name of Dan Barker in 2009. Dan Barker came out with a book titled Godless in 2008. And in that book he said Peter Singer is recognized as the world's leading ethicist. An ethicist is someone who is supposed to analyze very difficult issues and tell the world which actions or reactions would be right and which ones would be wrong. Peter Singer is recognized among many circles as the world's leading ethicist. Now, he certainly wouldn't be in our circle because his ethics fail to include the largest fact available, and that's the existence of God. But he is an atheist ethicist. And here's what he says. If we compare a severely defective human infant with a non-human animal, I'll say a dog or a pig, for example, we'll often find the non-human to have superior capacities. Only the fact that the defective infant is a member of the species Homo sapiens, read that only the fact that the defective infant is a human, leads it to be treated differently from the dog or pig. Species membership alone, however, is not morally relevant. He says, you know what? As it is traditionally, we would look at a defective human being and we'd look at a dog or a pig. The dog or a pig would be perfectly fine, but the human being would be defective. And guess what? We'd save the human being. And you know why we'd save it? Simply because it's a human being. It's a member of the species Homo sapiens. But he says, species membership alone is not morally relevant. You don't save a creature alive because it's a certain species. Because if humans are just animals, then, what's the difference between a dog or a pig or a human? He says you're supposed to assess the value of something based on its productivity to society. Now, note, this is not me talking. I'm not making this up. I'm not pulling this out of the air. This is the world's leading ethicist, according to Dan Barker, who is the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is the largest foundation of non-believers in North America. Now, Singer says that a fetus is known to be disabled is widely accepted as grounds for abortion. Yet in discussing abortion, we say that birth does not mark a morally significant dividing line. I can't see how one could defend the view that a fetus may be replaced before birth, but newborn infants may not. Now, of course, we would argue with him from a Christian standpoint. If you see a defective infant that is in its mother's womb, just because it's defective in some way, mentally or physically, we would never say that you can murder that child because of a defect. But what he's coming from is the secular point of view. And he says, look, if we look into a mother's womb and we see a defective infant, everybody in the discussion says you can kill it. He said, but I don't see how that you say you can kill it a month before it's born, but you don't say you can kill it a week after it's born. It doesn't make sense to me. He said, I don't see how you're saying birth is a morally dividing line. Now listen to us. We've been arguing that for years, haven't we? Birth is not a morally dividing line. What we have always said is that from conception, a child is a child is a child. If you're to go to the New Testament, you see that the Greek word brephos, Luke uses to describe John the Baptizer in his mother's womb, exactly like he discusses Jesus Christ born in the manger later in his text. Yeah, we've been saying this for years. Although what he's saying is, if we can kill it before it's born, we can kill it after it's born. That's exactly what he's saying. Now listen to him say it to you. Nevertheless, the main point's clear. Killing a disabled infant isn't morally equivalent to killing a person. Very often it's not wrong at all. Now it would be something if this guy was if he was not respected in the evolutionary atheistic community as the leading ethicist that they've got. But he is. This is not me making up the implications of atheism, saying this is where it leads. This is the world's leading ethicist admitting this is where it leads. You see the difference? And he says, I'll tell you what, if we're just animals and we evolved from primordial slime millions of years ago, then what we need to do is assess whether we've got any value to society. And if we see an infant that doesn't have value, at least not as much value as we think it should, and we see a dog or pig that's going to be able to give us some bacon or do some drug sniffing in the airport, then we eliminate the human, and it doesn't matter if we eliminate him before it's born or after it's born. Get rid of him so that we can have resources to help this dog or pig. Do you understand that this man goes on to say that what the parents and doctors ought to do is get together and have a period of about a month or so where they watch the child after it's born, and if after a month of this child being born it doesn't progress like they think it should, they can throw it literally in the trash can and start again. By their fruits you will know them. Some unfortunate humans, James Rachel says, in Created from Animals, the Moral Implications of Darwinism, well, because they've suffered brain damage or something like that, they're not rational agents. What are we to say about them? This guy, if I understand it correctly, was a professor at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. He said, the natural conclusion, according to the doctrine we're considering, would be that their status is that of mere animals, and perhaps we should go on to conclude that they may be used as non-human animals are used. Perhaps as laboratory experiments or as food. In the late 1980s, a man by the name of Jeffrey Dahmer killed 19 young men and boys in ways that would literally turn your stomach, probably make you vomit if you heard about it. He was in a 1994 interview with Stone Phillips. Stone Phillips said, "What in the world convinced you that you could do this kind of stuff to your fellow humans?" Here's what Jeffrey Dahmer said. He said, "I had always believed the lie of evolution, and I thought that if I was a blob of primordial slime, what did it matter what one blob of primordial slime did to another blob of primordial slime?" Stone Phillips said, "When did you change your mind?" Jeffrey Dahmer looked over at his dad, Lionel Dahmer, and he said, "Dad, when you sent me that creation science material," if I understand it correctly, some of that was from Apologetics 3. He said he changed his mind about the value of human life when he realized that that value came from God. Now that's the only time you change your mind. When you realize that the inherent value of human life comes from your Creator. If you don't have a Creator, you got no human value. And so you treat animals like lab rats or food, according to James Rachels. Continue with me. Adolf Hitler, you'll recognize the name, killed 6 million Jews, 4 million other people, blacks, Poles, gypsies, people who were crippled, old. Here's what Adolf Hitler said. "Thus there results the subjection of a number of people under the will, often only of a few persons, a subjection based simply upon the right of the stronger." Well, where do you get that right? A right which, as we see in nature, can be regarded as the sole conceivable right because it's founded on reason. Charles Darwin said that he was writing on the origin of species by natural selection or the preservation of favored races. He said the survival of the fittest. You're stronger, you survive, you pass on your genes, and that makes the next generation stronger. You go into a steak joint, you order a 16-ounce T-bone, the guy next to you orders a 16-ounce T-bone, yours gets there, it looks like a 10-ounce, his gets there, it looks like a 24-ounce. You walk over, you say, "Give me your steak, I want it." He says, "No, you can't have my steak." You punch him in the face, you take it. Adolf Hitler says that's how things should go. You see a lion live because it's bigger than the gazelle. You see a tiger live because it's bigger than the wildebeest. Human beings pass on their genes because they're the most fittest, and if you can eliminate those who are less fit than you, then you do it. And if you think that doesn't happen, then you listen to the stories that are told from Columbine, the 2 individuals who went into their high school and killed almost a score of people, said that we are natural selectors, eliminating people that are less fit. Continue with me. Dr. Eric Pianka, in 2006, he was the state science teacher of the year for the entire state of Texas. Texas is a pretty big state. This is a very prestigious honor. This man studies reptiles. He stood up before an assembly of 400 science teachers, and he said, "Humans are no better than bacteria. We need to eliminate 90% of the human population." And he favored an airborne Ebola virus that would kill people in a matter of about 3 days. You would hope that out of 400 scientists in the room, the reaction would be that they were appalled to such a message, and yet they stood and gave him a standing ovation at the end of his speech. Now, what are the fruits of atheism? You see, the logical conclusion of atheism is simply that humans don't have any inherent value, that they're not created in the image of God, that they are not endowed with certain inalienable rights, and that they are a means to an end. But that's not true. In fact, so not true is it that the Bible explains to us that what shall it profit if a man shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul, or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Do you understand right now that you have an immortal soul that will last longer than any nation that the world has ever seen? That your soul, your one soul, Oh, it's worth more than the entire economy of the United States of America. In fact, it's worth more than the entire nation of the United States of America as far as a nation and government goes, because your soul right now, from your conception years ago to now, your soul will last for eternity. And there's not a nation in the world that will do that. In fact, you are so very valuable that God would empty the treasure of heaven, Jesus Christ himself, and Jesus would elect to hang on a cross to save your soul. See, that's the value of human life right there. Now, a man by the name of William Ernest Henley. William Ernest Henley had a hard time. He had bone tuberculosis. At the age of 16, he had one of his legs amputated in a freak accident. I think it was about the age of 42. A chain wrapped around his other leg and drug him down the train track. Almost killed him. Thought he was going to have his other leg amputated. He died after a life of some considerable pain in his early 50s. He wrote a poem titled Invictus. A man that you might recognize by the name of Timothy McVeigh quoted Invictus as his very last words. He didn't actually quote them verbally. He wrote them down on a piece of paper. Timothy McVeigh filled a rental truck up with explosives, drove it into the government building in Oklahoma, killed 164 people, 13 of which were daycare children under the age of 4. They asked him what he thought about killing 13 4-year-olds. He said, well, it's collateral damage for the kind of statement I'm trying to make. It was the most murderous act of domestic terrorism that our country has seen to date. He quoted Invictus. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be. For my unconquerable soul, in the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced or cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbound. Beyond this place of wrath and tears lies but the horror of the shade. And yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. I'll tell you what McVeigh and Henley were trying to do. They were trying to convince us that it didn't matter what the world situation was, whether there was a God or whether there was not. They were in charge of their own destiny. And yet, if you listen closely, that message didn't come out. Beyond this place of wrath and tears lies but the horror of the shade. You see, the Bible explains to us that God has placed eternity in our hearts. That if we are to side with atheism and unbelief, it's going to be because we're going to ignore and jettison every bit of legitimate evidence. And ultimately, we're going to know that we're lying. And there's only going to be one thing that's going to wait for us on the other side of eternity. And that's horror. You see, the most bitter fruit of atheism is that when it comes to it, and an atheist sees that his life is draining and that he is about to go into the abyss, there's nothing that can be there but fear. A young lady by the name of Dorothea Day was enraptured with William Ernest Henley's humanistic teachings and thinking until she was introduced to the teachings of Jesus Christ. She wrote a response to Henley. You can read it. Out of the light that dazzles me, bright as the sun from pole to pole, I thank the God I know to be, for Christ is conqueror of my soul. Since his the sway of circumstance, I would not wince nor cry aloud under the rule which men call chance. My head with joy is humbly bowed. Beyond this place of sin and tears, that life with him and his the aid, despite the menace of the years, keeps and shall keep me unafraid. I have no fear, though straight the gate. He cleared my punishment from the scroll. Christ is the master of my fate. Christ is the captain of my soul. You see, the sweetest fruit of Christianity and a belief in God, is that you can know for a fact, where you're going after this life. In that debate with Dan Barker, the question was asked to Dan, and this illustrated our point this morning very well. Dan said, there is not a single action in and of itself that is always wrong. I can think of an exception in every case. In the debate with Peter Payne, a student at the university came to him and said, could you ever think of a time when rape would be okay? Dan said, well, some things are so outlandish that it'd be hard to do, but yes, I could. If an alien society came down and said, we're going to kill everybody unless you rape somebody, then yes, it'd be your moral obligation to do that. I'd heard that debate. I said, Dan Barker, you still believe that? He said, yeah. I said, what about raping 2 people? He said, yeah, that'd be your moral obligation to save all of humanity. I said, what about 2,000? He said, yeah, that'd be your moral obligation to save all of humanity. I said, what about 2 million? He said, yeah, that'd be your moral obligation. He could tell that the crowd that was predominantly members of the church was aghast at his statement. In fact, I was amazed that he could stand up and say, you should rape 2 million people, and anybody continue to follow a man like that. I was dumbfounded. But he could see that the entirety of the audience, at least, you're looking at 80% of it, could not believe what he was saying. And he looked at me and he said, yeah, Kyle, but you would thank me because I'd saved your life. And I said, I would never thank you for committing something that heinous and wrong and bad, because I've got somewhere better to go after this life. He said, you don't know that. And I said, yes, I do. You see, that's the beauty of Christianity. You do know, if you can say Christ is the captain of your soul, if you have been added to the Lord's church by God himself, obeying the plan that he established from the beginning of time, even before that. And on the day of Pentecost, when Peter stood up and told the people they had killed Jesus Christ, the Son of God, they were struck to the heart, pricked, and they said, what do we do? And Peter said, repent and be baptized, every one of you. And that day, 3,000 people were baptized and added to the Lord's church by God himself. And tell me they didn't know exactly where they were going when they died. Oh, they did. And so do I. And so can you. If you can honestly say, Jesus Christ is the captain of my soul. If you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, I hope you will, as we stand and as we sing.